Pull up a map of the Middle East right now. Just stare at it for 5 seconds. Because everything you are about to see in the next few weeks is going to redraw it permanently. Something cracked inside Tehran this week, not on the battlefield, inside the building where Iran's leaders decide who survives and who gets thrown under the bus. And what just happened tells you more about where this war is heading than any missile count or any press conference. Stay with me to the end of this video because there is a single development from today, May 7th, 2026, that almost every major outlet missed completely. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Look at the Strait of Hormuz on that map, 33 kilometers wide at its narrowest point. A corridor of water so small that on a standard atlas, it barely registers as a gap between two land masses.
Yet according to the United States Energy Information Administration, roughly 20% of the entire world's oil supply passes through that choke point every single day. 20%. Not of regional oil, of global oil. Every hospital in Europe, every factory in Asia, every gas station where you filled up your tank this week, all of it dependent on that thin strip of water staying open. Iran shut it down. On February 28, 2026, the United States and Israel launched a coordinated military campaign now known as Operation Epic Fury. Airstrikes hit Iranian military sites, government infrastructure, and in the most consequential single moment of the 21st century so far, killed Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei. The man who had run Iran's ideological machine for 34 years was gone overnight. Iran's response was immediate: missile and drone strikes against Israel, attacks on U.S. military bases across the region, strikes that reached Bahrain, Jordan, Kuwait, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE simultaneously, and the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, the move that sent shockwaves not through military briefing rooms, but through commodity trading floors from London to Singapore within hours. Now here is what the map looked like in that moment. The world's most critical oil corridor sealed. Iran's proxies activating across the region simultaneously. A new supreme leader, Mojtaba Khamenei, the deceased leader's own son, rushed into position while the regime was still absorbing shock. And at the center of all of it, a question that nobody in the international community knew how to answer. Was this the beginning of the end for the Islamic Republic? Or was Tehran about to outlast another crisis the same way it had outlasted every crisis for 47 years? That question is now being answered. And the answer is nothing anyone expected.
Before we go any further, if you are new here, this channel covers verified, authenticated geopolitical developments with actual analysis, not just headlines. Hit subscribe right now, because what is unfolding over the next 30 days will move faster than most people can keep up with, and you are going to want the framework ready before the breaking news hits. Rewind briefly to understand why geography is the key to reading this correctly. Draw a circle around 3 locations on your map: Tehran in the north, Islamabad in the east, Muscat, Oman in the south. Those 3 cities form the invisible diplomatic triangle where the fate of Iran is currently being negotiated. Not in Washington, not in Geneva, in Islamabad and Muscat, through back channels that most mainstream outlets are barely tracking. Pakistan became the unlikely mediator of this conflict. When Washington and Tehran needed an intermediary that both sides could tolerate, Pakistan stepped forward.
On April 8, 2026, a 2-week ceasefire was brokered with Islamabad as the bridge. Iran had rejected a 45-day, 2-phase ceasefire framework initially proposed, and instead submitted its own 10-point plan that included lifting sanctions, reconstruction commitments, and a protocol for reopening the strait. That ceasefire has been violated by both sides since, but the channel stayed open. Now look at what that geographic triangle tells you about power. Iran is no longer negotiating from a position where it can dictate its own terms. It is negotiating through a country that is itself economically dependent on stable energy corridors. Pakistan's own economy bleeds when the strait stays closed. That is not a neutral mediator.
That is a mediator with its own deadline. But here is where the map gets redrawn in a way nobody saw coming. On May 4, 2026, Iran submitted a three-phase peace proposal to Washington.
Phase 1 demanded the lifting of the naval blockade within 30 days as a condition for entering negotiations at all. Phase 2 outlined a return to uranium enrichment at 3.67% under what Tehran called a zero-storage principle. Phase 3 described a broader regional security architecture involving Arab neighbors, a regime that spent 12 years across the P5+1 nuclear negotiations from 2003 to 2015, deliberately avoiding every deadline, just handed Washington one. That is not a negotiating posture from a country that believes it is winning. That is a signal from a country watching its clock run down. Gas prices in the United States hit $4.30 per gallon this week, according to live tracking data. That number is not abstract. Every cent above $4 is felt directly in grocery bills, in transportation costs, in the price of every manufactured product that moves on a truck. The economic pressure is flowing in both directions simultaneously, which is exactly why a 30-day window creates urgency for both parties. Now, this is the part most channels are skipping entirely, and I need you to pay very close attention because this is where the map gets complicated. Inside Tehran right now, there is a war being fought that does not involve missiles. It is a war over who controls the negotiating table. Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf, Speaker of Iran's parliament and head of the negotiating team, has reportedly stepped down. According to sources cited by Iran International, Ghalibaf was reprimanded specifically for attempting to include the nuclear issue in talks with Washington and was forced to resign under internal pressure. A possible replacement floating in regime corridors is Saeed Jalili, a hardline figure who has historically opposed any compromise with the West. Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi is also reportedly maneuvering to take over the negotiations. Think about what that internal map looks like. The pragmatist who was willing to put nuclear issues on the table has been removed. The hardliners, backed by the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, are pushing for control of the process. And President Pezeshkian, who was elected as a moderate in 2024, posted publicly this week that in Iran there are no radicals or moderates, only Iranians unified under complete obedience to the supreme leader. When the president, who was supposed to be the reformist voice, publicly announces there is no reformist voice left, that is not rhetoric. That is a man being squeezed by forces above him, telling you exactly what is happening behind closed doors. Drop a comment below right now. Do you think Iran will accept a deal within 30 days? Yes or no? I want to see what this community thinks before the deadline hits. Back to the map, because geography is still doing the work here. Look at where the IRGC operates, not just inside Iran, but across a crescent stretching from Lebanon through Syria, into Iraq, down through Yemen, and across the Gulf. That geographic footprint is not just a military asset, it is an economic network. Sanctions evasion routes, oil smuggling corridors, financial flows through shell companies in Gulf-free zones that Washington has been systematically dismantling since late 2025. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent confirmed in late April 2026 that Gulf state partners, specifically naming the UAE, had shifted from permissive postures to active collaboration in identifying and freezing IRGC-linked assets. When the UAE becomes an active partner in economic pressure against Iran rather than a corridor for Iranian financial survival, the map of how Iran sustains itself financially changes dramatically. Add to that what Iran's own energy sector data is revealing. Tehran began proactively cutting crude oil production before storage reached capacity, because with the maritime blockade constraining export routes, there is nowhere to send what is already being produced. One oil tanker carries approximately 2 million barrels in a single voyage. No land-based smuggling corridor, not through Pakistan, not through any border crossing, can replicate that volume at any scale that changes the economic math.
Now here is where two different readings of this situation produce two completely different predictions, and you need to hear both. Reading 1. Iran is genuinely at a structural breaking point. The supreme leader is dead. The economy was already in freefall before the war started. In December 2025, Treasury Secretary Bessent described the collapse of the Iranian currency as the strategy's grand culmination. UN snapback sanctions triggered in September 2025 froze Iranian assets abroad, suspended arms transactions, and collapsed the rial.
The domestic car market is experiencing what Iran's own Ministry of Industry described as abnormal price increases from artificial market manipulation. A government considering importing used vehicles to stabilize supply is a government whose industrial infrastructure is under visible stress. Under this reading, the 30-day deadline and the peace proposal are genuine signals of exhaustion. Reading 2. This is the same playbook, executed by different hands under more pressure. Iran submits proposals designed to be substantive enough to generate international pressure on Washington to engage, while preserving every strategic asset that matters to the regime's long-term survival. The 3.67% enrichment proposal, the refusal to dismantle nuclear infrastructure, the absence of any independent verification mechanism in the May 4th document, all of it mirrors the structural logic of every Iranian proposal going back 20 years.
Under this reading, the IRGC removing the pragmatists from the negotiating table is not a sign of weakness. It is a consolidation of power, ensuring that whatever deal gets signed, if any deal gets signed, never crosses the lines that the Revolutionary Guard considers existential. Both readings are internally coherent. Both are supported by available evidence. The honest answer right now is that we are watching both things happening simultaneously. Scroll back to that geographic triangle for a moment: Tehran, Islamabad, Muscat. Oman has historically served as one of the few diplomatic backchannels between Washington and Tehran that both sides trusted. Muscat hosted secret pre-negotiations before the 2015 nuclear deal. Omani diplomats have operated as trusted intermediaries through multiple administrations.
The fact that Muscat remains active in this current mediation structure is significant, not as a sign of imminent peace, but as a sign that the channel remains open even after everything that has happened since February 28th. Now extend the map further east. Look at China. Beijing has enormous economic exposure to Iranian oil. It has also been navigating extraordinarily delicate relationships with Washington throughout the early months of 2026. Trump explicitly demanded on March 15th that NATO and China help reopen the Strait of Hormuz. China did not publicly comply. But China also has not publicly obstructed. That careful positioning from Beijing is its own form of geographic leverage, and it is leverage that Tehran knows exists. Further west on the map, look at Russia. Moscow has its own strategic interest in protracted instability in the Gulf energy corridor. High oil prices help Russia's own export revenues. A prolonged standoff between Washington and Tehran serves Russian interests in ways that create uncomfortable alignment between Moscow and Tehran, even when the two are not formally coordinating. That is the real map being redrawn right now. Not just the physical borders of conflict, the economic and diplomatic geography of who benefits from resolution and who benefits from prolonged uncertainty. And now, today's development that pulled this video together. This morning, May 7th, 2026, Iran's parliament speaker Ghalibaf posted on X mocking what he called Operation Foxios, a reference to a report from Axios describing a one-page, 14-point memorandum of understanding between Washington and Tehran that would trigger an immediate ceasefire and launch a 30-day negotiation window. Ghalibaf wrote, "Operation Trust Me Bro failed. Now back to routine with Operation Foxios." Think carefully about what that means. The man who was Iran's chief negotiator, who was reportedly removed from that position for being too willing to negotiate, is now publicly mocking the reports of a deal being close.
Either he is performing hardline loyalty to protect himself from the IRGC faction that pushed him out, or he genuinely believes the Axios report is false, or both. Marco Rubio, speaking on the U.S. side, said the upcoming 48 hours represent a turning point. American officials described the reported framework as a fragile but significant step toward de-escalation, while simultaneously warning that the risk of breakdown remains high. Fragile but significant. Risk of breakdown remains high. Those are not the words of a negotiation approaching resolution. Those are the words of a negotiation standing on a ledge. So what does this mean for your wallet, specifically in the next 60 to 90 days? If the deal holds and the strait reopens, global oil supply stabilizes, prices at the pump decline.
Treasury Secretary Bessent said publicly he anticipates oil prices falling significantly on the other side of a successful resolution. That transmission from Gulf diplomacy to your gas station is not speculation. It is supply economics. If the deal collapses, the blockade continues or escalates, and global oil markets enter a supply disruption cycle that historically produces consumer price increases of 8 to 12% across energy-dependent goods categories within 2 to 3 quarters. Your grocery bill, your electricity bill, the cost of everything that travels by truck or ship to get to you. Global oil inventories entering this period were already below their 5-year seasonal averages, according to International Energy Agency data. There is less buffer in the system than during any comparable previous disruption cycle. The next 30 days are not just a geopolitical story. They are an economic countdown that commodity markets are already pricing quietly, in small daily increments, in ways that will not make front-page news until the effects are already inside your cost of living. Here is where everything lands. The map of Iran's influence, its economic lifelines, its nuclear geography, its proxy networks, is being redrawn in real time by forces that are moving faster than public reporting can track. The supreme leader is dead. The pragmatist negotiator has been pushed aside. The IRGC is consolidating control. A 30-day deadline submitted by a regime that built its survival on infinite patience is ticking right now. And a 14-point memorandum that one side is calling a fragile breakthrough and the other side is publicly mocking as disinformation is supposedly the document that determines what the next chapter looks like. Watch the map, not the press conferences, not the tweets. Watch what moves, what closes, what corridor stays open or shuts down. Because geography does not lie, even when officials do. If you want this analysis the moment new data surfaces, before headlines frame it for you, subscribe to Verified Bulletin right now. Hit the notification bell. And if this video gave you something the mainstream coverage missed, smash that like button because it tells YouTube to push this to people who actually need to see it. The next move on this board is coming faster than most people expect.